Hello and welcome to the first of the OCP Virtual Summit panels. My name is Dave Maltz, and I'll be the moderator for this panel. Today, OCP is a driving innovation in open platforms, creating platforms on which people can bring their ideas and find new possibilities through making changes to the platform itself. One of the very disruptive technologies that are emerging over the past couple of years is open software to run on the routers, switches, and devices inside the networks of enterprises and large-scale cloud data centers. I'll be meeting with a number of the leaders of teams that are taking this open source network operating systems and deploying it into their networks to find out from them what's working, what's not, what kind of challenges they've been facing, and what solutions they've been coming up with to realize those new possibilities. So thanks, and let's get started. I'd like to start by introducing the panel. First, I'll introduce Yu Lee. Yu is the Vice President of Architecture at Comcast. His team is responsible for Comcast's IP network architecture. Yu, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Next up, I'd like to introduce Thomas Soppa. Thomas is the network manager at Criteo. He's responsible for the production network of all of Criteo's business. Managing a team of about 20 people, they work on everything from network load balancing that takes care of the ingress traffic for customer-facing services, the network edge that takes care of interconnecting Criteo to the outside world, and the network data center that takes care of everything inside of Criteo's data centers, the LAN and its layer 3 5-stage cloth matrix. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you, Dave.
Next, I'd like to introduce Parenthop Lahari. Parenthop currently leads the network data center and server hardware engineering for eBay as its vice president. He has 25 years of experience in architecting, engineering, and operating networks for large-scale internet backbones, cloud-scale data centers, and edge networks. Parenthop has also pioneered on networking technologies and holds patents related to networking. Hi, Parenthop.
Thanks, Dave.
Pablo Espinosa joins us from Target, where he is the VP of Engineering. He's responsible for Target's global network, covering the company's investments in hardware, software, and services. His responsibilities include the data center, the WAN, enterprise connectivity, network security, and traffic management. As the business enabler there, he drives the architecture, engineering, and strategic planning to deliver on the promise of a more agile and software-defined infrastructure, bringing 25 years of technology experience to bear. Thanks for joining us, Pablo.
Thank you, Dave. Great to be here.
I'd like to introduce Dr. Quaid Campbell from T-Mobile. Dr. Campbell has nearly 2 decades of telecommunications experience with multiple Tier 1 U.S. wireless carriers. He leads a team of technologists at T-Mobile responsible for the planning, architecture, design, and implementation of T-Mobile's network and common infrastructure. Quaid and his team partner broadly to further extend T-Mobile's lead in telecom, and they're actively driving investments to further enable T-Mobile, as well as differentiate the company strategically beyond 5G. Thanks for joining us today, Quaid.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, great. Well, to get us started, I'd like to open the floor by saying, what was it about having a disaggregated open source software that you could run on your network devices that attracted you to making this journey and starting down this road? Pablo, maybe you could give us the first answer for this question.
Yeah, I'd love to, Dave. Thanks. For us, there were really 2 key drivers and that are still obviously at play here. For one, it was around increasing to deploy code. And when we step back and look at the infrastructure side of things, this is across a myriad of hybrid private clouds, public clouds, platforms, with an ecosystem of about 500 microservices. And roughly 80 to 85% of our computing environments are actually virtualized. And so we had to step back and really think about the role that the network would play in this. And essentially, it was all about velocity, and velocity for driving features, custom features, where there were features for workload services, features for our infrastructure primitives, and really driving them with scale. And so what we found is with the open source software is definitely a broader sense of flexibility and choice. We look at the operating system. just an increased demand of the business that have led us towards greater investments for areas such as IoT, vision computing, and we've really had to also rethink our entire multi-availability zone architecture and our broader traffic management architecture as well. And at the heart of all this, it was really about our data, right? It's an entirely new way of managing data, not only from a processing and efficiency perspective, but I mean, really having a way to help democratize the data in a way that we can actually have the network learn, adjust, adopt, and tell us things that are all characteristic based on how it's experienced, right? So part of the opportunity here, as we're seeing it from an open source perspective, is really looking at things like advanced telemetry, metrics, tracing, right, to really be better informed around some of the decisions. And really focus on a higher degree of reliability and stability for the network. So those are really the two key drivers we're sort of pivoting on right now.
Excellent. Parenthop, would you like to add on to that?
Oh, sure. So, great points, Pablo. So from our point of view, the motivations come from the fact that we do want to continually invest on automating the network, having granular monitoring, diagnostic system, which can pinpoint, isolate, and remediate issues very, very quickly. But we don't want those software investment to get tied with some OEM vendors platform or not get tied into some walled garden solution, because there are a lot of good OEMs and they have really good solutions out there. But when we invest, we don't want to get tied into those solutions. And the other motivation we had was, even if you have to change the hardware and go with other chipsets, like you never know going forward how things are going to morph, we didn't want our software investment to go away. So we wanted to land on a platform where we have stickiness and we can continually invest without the fear of that platform going away.
Great. Do other people have different motivations they'd like to share? That theme around... go ahead.
I think that most of us share the same motivation. On our side, the initial goal was to rebalance the relationship with manufacturers, with hardware vendors. Before we started to work with SONiC, we were in a kind of halfway, as we were able to mix hardware from various vendors in our fabrics. But when we had to select new platforms or new devices, we were still limited by our ability to onboard new operating system and new control plane components. I mean, at constant headcount. So the idea to decouple the hardware from the operating system and control plane and ultimately have a unique operating system on all our fabrics was making a lot of sense to us for the future.
Excellent. I'm going to go take us ahead to the next question. So could I ask each of you, where are you in the process of deploying SONiC or open source into your network devices? Are you evaluation, deployment, in production? Thomas, why don't you start us off?
We already put SONiC in production. One of our 9 fabrics fully runs SONiC at the spine and super spine level for a total of 64 boxes. So we host something like 3,000 servers there. I'm talking about production fabrics, meaning supporting our core business. While I'm speaking, we are deploying a new 400 gigs fabric in Japan, which will be fully running SONiC, including this time top of rack, for a total of 100 boxes and way more in the future, as we plan to host up to 10,000 servers. For data center fabrics only, since last year, SONiC is our default operating system. So we only buy SONiC compatible devices starting now.
Why don't we just go around the, I'd say the room, but the virtual room. Quaid, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so definitely, I think that right now we're currently in evaluation, but really thinking about where we at T-Mobile can take this within the cloud infrastructure space. I think unifying on a single OS with multi-vendor hardware is really a strategy that we're deep into at the moment. And I think, SONiC presents that, plus lots of the other additional points that were made on the first question there, as we talk about the visibility, telemetry, some of the enhancements that are there that give us some visibility we may not have had. Also, being able to tie that closely with automation and the future of being able to do end-to-end deployment is going to be very, very critical for us. And especially multi-cloud. And I think, how do we work long-term strategic within that space is going to be a critical portion that my strategy guys work on at the moment as well. But definitely we're looking to where we bring it into deployment quickly and being able to leverage it in large scale as we move farther edge even. So very promising.
Thanks, Quaid. Pablo, where are you in your process?
Yeah, so I'll add where I would say at the tail end of evaluation, specifically within our data center for one of our fabrics within our superspine. We plan to probably put a small percentage of production workload on it, probably in the next quarter, I think. So we're kind of coming to that arena at this point. But one of the things we're also looking at evaluating is really approaching it, and to Quaid's point, right? We envision a more standard single operating system across our fleet and across the entire network ecosystem. So one of the things we're also evaluating are, how do we look at SONiC as a kind of a prototype enabler, if you will. Like if you look at the operating system and understand specific use cases, not just the data center, but given that we're an enterprise, company, looking at it for our store footprint, our distribution footprint, whether it's public, private cloud, and so forth. And those are some of the things we're going to be evaluating throughout the year as well. So again, very exciting stuff we've seen so far. Again, I think it's we're starting to see some of the promise, right? I think, if you will, that has been talked about and hyped for quite some time.
Thanks, Pablo. Parenthop?
Sure. So we are also in the lab evaluation phase right now. We are having multiple hardware vendors run the same SONiC on the top of it, and we are trying to figure out how well it holds up. We have invested extensively on our testing capabilities. So we are using things where we can test the protocol as well as the scaling of the protocol, the features available in the protocol, and we have a pretty wide scale way of kind of pressurizing the box to see if it is going to hold up to the load of production or not. So we are in the evaluation phase.
Great, thanks. You?
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely getting ready to deploy it. So next month we're going to deploy the first SONiC fabric in the network. This will be a brand new greenfield fabric, which we want to try to prove how SONiC's going to hold on for the production traffic. One experience so far from the evaluation to the deployment, we like SONiC in the sense that because it's because of the openness, and then we use it to kick the tire to try to start fully programmatic automations. So we've actually learned a lot from that, and then we find out that is because of the openness, it's really easy to integrate into the pipeline to start deploying it fully automation. So that's something that we really see the promises in the SONiC, and just on top of all the panelists is one of the major motivation using SONiC in the network is to try to support multi-vendors, multi-chipsets. So this is something that I think we see a lot of promise now from the SONiC community, and then we really believe that this is working together. This is definitely something we can leverage in our data center and start expanding it even to go further.
So that's great. I mean, we've got the full range of experience here from folks who have it had in production already to people who are just at the initial stages of considering it and seeing what it can do. Moving on to the next question. So what advice would you give to companies who are just starting out on this process, who are, maybe they have a traditional network, traditional firmware running on it, and are considering moving to open source software? What advice would you want to know based on where you started the process? Parenthop, why don't you lead us off?
Sure. That's a great question. I would definitely say that look at your motivations in a very clinical and unbiased way. because if you have a very complicated small enterprise network and you want to just look at SONiC to replace your OEM switch as a cost, like you're just doing it for saving costs, I would say that there is more room for introspection, because is it worth it? And the box is going to mature, and most probably it's going to carry the day, but still there is closer room for introspection. But on the other side, if you have already embarked on an underlying infrastructure like that is standardized, cookie cutter, like more of a cloud infrastructure, and you're really passionate about automating change management, developing granular monitoring and diagnostic, like I was talking about in the past, SONiC can potentially help you immensely in this journey because of some of the things that I was talking about in the past. So you have to kind of be very careful about what kind of roles you pick up. I wouldn't suggest that you go for very complicated roles to start with. Start with roles that are lower in complexity, lower in availability needs, like a spine where you might have 8 spine, and even if you lose one, it's going to be just 1/8 of the capacity that you lose. So try out in those kind of roles. And then the other area you have to watch out for is the group of engineers that you assemble in order to pull this off. Because, we have been all in the network industry, and there are a lot of people who love the OEM box and the CLIs and stuff. But if you get into a situation where you're asking somebody to deliver you a technology where they're not motivated towards delivering it, you're going to get into some kind of issues, right? So essentially, the people you assemble should have the right skill set, should be motivated towards putting together the right ecosystem, and then things should flow. So I think what I would say is, SONiC is very powerful, and it's a unique option for that matter, because the way the whole thing has come together, and given our investment that we have made and the results that we are seeing, I think it is there to.
Okay, great.
That's it, Dave.
Okay, we're getting a couple audio dropouts as we go, but the engineers behind the scenes will be working to fix that and get this web stream as clear as possible. As you know, we're all adapting to the new environment. Pablo, or you're sort of in the middle of the deployment experience. Would one of you like to offer your comments next?
Yeah, and I think Parenthop made some great comments around the approach. I mean, my advice would be very similar. I would say very, very specific, right? In terms of, starting very small and very use case specific, and primarily focused on just explicit objectives and goals behind it, right? I think one of the things that I would say we learned pretty quickly out of the gate is team that you're assembling for this, think about objectives and goals that are essentially outside of the norm, that are either capability bound or maybe an operationally bound, that have never been solved for before, right? Because I think what you don't want to get into is this is just yet another test use case where the engineers will basically just say compile a set of feature parity list of things that they're just going to test against, and then move on and, make the check mark, right? So part of our learning process was really just understand, like, those use cases are just so key in that focus area around what are the specific problems that you're, and then the goals you're trying to solve, and pick some good ones that are obviously near and dear to the team's approach as well. So.
Thanks, Pablo. Thomas, you're in full production. What perspectives do you have on what advice someone just starting would want to know?
No specific advice. I fully agree with what has been said. In our case, our design is inspired by what you do at Microsoft or Facebook and the others. So our use case is very close to what SONiC has been built for. So in our case, it was really easy, and the product was mature enough for the deployment. It was just a new network operating system. So if your design it looks like that, I mean, it should be easy, and you should not be afraid. regarding the maturity of the product. It's a matter of design. The design must fit what SONiC can provide currently, and it's a matter of scale. It was very interesting for us because we could deploy the product to a lot of devices. When you operate at a certain scale, we think that you might consider investing on the skills of people rather than buying license. I think this is the key point when you have to make the initial decision. By learning to use an open source operating system on top of your device, your team, they will learn a lot regarding the device internals. They will have access to more precise tooling to debug. They will be able to adapt the behavior of the device to the ecosystem rather than adapt the ecosystem to the device. And ultimately, they will be able to solve more complex issues and produce better design. So investing on people rather than paying license, this is the decision you want to make, and it's perfectly fine to decide to pay for license. I mean, it's not an issue.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Thomas. I'm going to move us on to the next question, which is looking at if you bring in open source new software into your network, how does that fit into your existing network management systems? Is it a net positive, a net negative? Why don't you tell us about your experience with Comcast? Okay, we're missing your audio stream.
Oh, sorry, I mute myself.
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, sorry. So we just treat SONiC as another NOS, NOS in our NMS. We already have multi vendors in our network. So we just first we take a small step, just try to bring SONiC in as a new NOS system into the into our mix. So but that being said, so that definitely requires some initial investment because it's a brand new OS and it's very different from the OEM we used to. So just like echo other panelists here, we will have to put the right team together. So we have to start the team with software people in the mindset, because when we all traditional network engineer coming in, they're used to CLI. It's definitely a journey for them to try to learn how to adopt it. And just because this is coming in, it's more we treat it as a software. So we have to change the model, slightly tweak the models now we have using the standard OEM and try to integrate into the SONiC. And we sometimes try to use this. We use analogies this is more in the beginning when we try to bring Linux into the network. So this is something that brand new. We have to understand that this is something new, so we have to manage the risk here. But from the purely NMS perspective, we just should treat it just another node, and we're just building a same abstraction layer to try to hide the capacity or the command. In this case, not really the command line, but the RESTful API on how to manage the box. I think so far we definitely see the investment pay off, because we are seeing when we see the more the chipset and the more the vendors coming to join the communities, and because we have a unified OS now can run on multiple platforms, what we invest now for the NMS will definitely be able to work on pretty much seamlessly when a new vendors coming in. when a hardware vendor using SONiC is coming into our production network. So we see a lot of plus there. But just being said, we have to be careful. Everybody who evaluates SONiC, when you try to bring it into the system, you have to keep in mind that you should look at it more like a software type app operating system than rather than the standard OEM type works. I think that one is one of the lessons that we learn when we integrate into NMS. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you. One of the questions that came in from the audience was, where are we getting hardware from? Are you purchasing hardware from white box vendors and then running SONiC on it, or are you going to a more traditional vendor who provide the hardware and an operating system along with the switch abstraction interface? Would anyone like to talk about what hardware sources they're using?
Yeah, so this is...
I'm happy to answer. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So definitely T-Mobile, we're definitely leaning more towards the traditional vendor boxes. We're also working with partners like
Hey, Quaid, we lost you a little bit on some of that. Could you restate parts of your answer?
Yes, sorry about that. We rely on traditional vendors. So Dell Technologies being one that we're partnering closely with at the moment, but also Intelco. Traditionally, we've had guys with Cisco's, Juniper's of the world. So
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to move us on to the next question here. One of the things that we've heard many people express is that would adopting open source software, something different than what traditional network engineers are trained in, be a big transition for their teams? And how to help ease the kind of transition to the team if there is some barrier to get over. Quaid, could you tell us about your experience?
Sure. So having been in telecom for a large part of my life, been at the forefront of positions.
Hey, Quaid, I think we're losing your audio feed. I'm going to let the engineers try and fix that and come back to you again. Would anyone else like to take an answer for that while they're tweaking
Sure,
the back end?
I can take a stab at it. What I would say here is, as I mentioned in the last question, that the network engineers that are really experts in typical OEM models and they take pride in the CLI of each OEM model, be it whatever, Junos OS or Nexus OS, they're there. So they're really smart people. And essentially, most of them are trying to get into new domain. They're trying to learn new skill set, and they're trying to get into Linux system admin. And a lot of things, like most of them are aspirational, and they're trying to rise to the occasion to get into a different domain. So one thing is sure that the SONiC platform needs a slightly different kind of skill set. Like you have to know how do you manage a Linux system and how to manage the containers inside it. It is slightly different from the typical appliance model. But at times, what I feel here is it's not that the people are trying to hold you back. They need you to show you the way. And once you show the way how to manage it like a Linux fleet, these guys will latch in really quickly, and they're going to basically come along really, really fast. And I think it is also a room to revisit some of the ways how we kind of run the appliance-based network. Because, for example, the source of truth database typically resides on the appliance itself, because the config morphs over a period of time after you deploy them. Now, there's a chance where you can make the config reside in GitHub as opposed to the switch itself. And, what I found is most of the network engineers that has been part of this project, they are coming out like in flying speed. They are evolving really, really fast.
Okay, great. Hey, Quaid, we've made some tweaks to your audio feed. Would you try your answer again?
Yeah, so having been in
I'm afraid we're still not getting audio. This is a time for the joke. How many network engineers does it take to run a video conference?
If only we had SONiC.
That's right. Okay. I'm going to move us ahead to the next question. So one thing that has come up is it possible for enterprise users, for other users, to adopt open source on the network switches? Is there necessary to have a commercial support or someone to sort of help you with that? What kind of help would you like to have from an external support partner? Where would you see them being able to add value for this? For this one, I'll always start with Pablo.
Yeah, I think that this is a great question. And I'll say it has the classical network engineering response, which is it depends. I would say at a standstill here, what the way we're leveraging SONiC is primarily from a purely an enterprise software framework perspective, right? As we know, SONiC was purpose-built for cloud, right? And so one of the things that we started to learn very, very quickly was that there needed to be a much deeper bench and skills around sort of the entire SDLC cycle of software development for infra, and in this particular case for an operating system for network. And so I think part of this is really all around just how do you really deliver infrastructure as code. And for us, the situation was, quite honestly, we just didn't have, and we still don't. We're still building this muscle. We didn't have the organizational muscle around software development for key areas around networking specifically, since this is such a brand new area in the networking industry itself. And so this is where we focus on partnership, right? And this partnership was whether it was helping us bridge those gaps, right? In terms of just the feature development of, say, enterprise-based features that go into a network, developing those, taking them through their cycle, right? Going through the hardware testing, regression testing, and so forth, right? As we're continuing to build sort of our muscle internally. But again, I think it really is it really does depend on both your, the organizational bench that you have, right? And then more specifically, the use cases that you're applying this towards, right? In terms of that. But for sure, I think, great opportunities where you can partner, with the OEMs out there in terms of just, as they're aligned with also a very similar approach on this.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and take us to one of the questions coming in from the audience. So what sort of if you're planning to do like a 200 rack deployment, what do you see as the timelines for that? How long would you allocate for the various phases of doing that kind of deployment?
I can definitely chime in here. So I think, for this, definitely for the two, like say, depending how automated now you put in the how much operation, so how much automation now you have for your network. For us, if let's say now you do fully automated, like you do the pure like CI/CD pipeline to do the deployment, leveraging the Ansible payload and the configuration. For us at least, like because we are really targeted on the spine layer, it's not really feature rich compared to the lifts. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Like 200 is pretty quick because once you go to automation, you just pretty much like load you have the management, you have the image put up, you have the management console in, and then you just like you just basically run the Ansible playbook, and then you bring up the whole BGP session, and then pretty much voila, it's up. So I would say that, this really, in the end is you have to have the mindset here, run it as a fully automated manner in order to bring up. And I know that this is something very different, like in the old day, at least when we started with the OEM model, because we have to used to log into the device and then check this, check that, and try to manually put it in CLI to bring up. And I know that there's some automation now also happening. Like, don't get me wrong, the OEM vendor, they are all really good, have tools there. But I think once we have that, then the size really doesn't matter. I mean, you just have to have the right architecture and the right tools. Then you can deploy pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you. I'll take us on to the next question here. So, related to that one I just asked, what are the things that would speed up the process of adopting open source network operating systems? Thomas, why don't you take this one for us?
Yeah, I won't talk from the technical perspective, but I think that there might be a lot of blind spots regarding the support and the contracts. We had some significant issues when it comes to decision making regarding the support and the chain of responsibility on the device in case you have a low-level issue. So currently, when you buy a switch or a router with its native operating system, it's quite easy. You get support from the vendor on the whole stack. When you buy a switch and you want to run SONiC on it, it's way more complex. You will take, obviously, the responsibility of the operating system itself and the control plane. You will expect the vendors to take some responsibility regarding the SAI implementation, for sure. But they won't offer that at the beginning. You will have to ask them and to have it written in the contract. But what about the drivers? What about the SDK? What about the ASIC itself? You as a customer have no contract with most of the ASIC provider. So it can begin to be quite tricky. So we asked all these questions to manufacturers. We had some good answers. We had some very bad answers too. So running SONiC in production is also a new way to deal with manufacturers, with vendors, to contract with them. And I think that there is room for improvement to the benefit of everybody here. Don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming manufacturers. They are doing a great job. It's just new for everybody. And I think that if we could clarify this array, it might help others to onboard SONiC and to have more adopters.
Okay. Thanks, Thomas. We've lost Quaid's video, but Quaid, you still there on audio? Would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, so I think partnership is very important. You know, in the telco world, having the right partners to allow you to adopt it and be able to find the meaningful positions you contribute to and transition your teams. And I think that's part of what I was trying to say earlier when my audio wasn't working. It's a lot about our people, organizations, operations, and processes. And telco having a long history here is, you know, a little bit slower to transition. And so these are very important for us to partner appropriately, as well as picking the right fundamental, great things to go solve with this. And I think that's the promise we have is, you know, being able to treat our management of devices differently in the future with the promise of SONiC and switches running SONiC.
Yeah, thanks, Quaid.
Okay, so
move on to the next question.
I wanted to add something. So
Go
Dave,
ahead,
I just want to add something. Hey, so I think one aspect which is really important is documentation, because when our engineers were trying to put together the first SONiC documentation part and throw in small YouTube videos and stuff, that's going to help a lot the people to come up on this SONiC thing. Ecosystem where the x86 server vendor and the Linux vendors are different. So the server support and the software support is two different things. And typically we handle it through a single OEM vendor in an appliance model. And, you know, it is kind of almost like a thing that is more fearful when you haven't faced it. And theoretically, it's more fearful than what actually it is. In most cases, it can be resolved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Parenthop.
Okay, thanks.
So many of you have talked about one of the things that attracted you to having open source software like SONiC was that you could build extensions and innovations on top of that. There are other third-party companies that are stepping into the space to offer those kinds of extensions, data mining, analytics, other things built on top of this open source framework. What applications, solutions would you want? Do you think the opportunities exist for these third parties to address? Quaid, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, definitely great question there. And I think that's, you know, at the forefront of my mind a lot. But again, back to, you know, starting with something practical, I think where we're looking is how do we disaggregate for management of multiple locations and, you know, things we've not been accustomed to. So how can we containerize lifecycle management portions for a disconnected cloud, so to speak, you know, for other things. And I think that's really just some of the starting. But again, if we can focus on containerizing core functions, UPFs, other things like that, it just makes sense in the future to run those on single switches and pooled resources as compared to maybe putting switches and servers out. So depending on location, form factors, whatnot. So a lot of what we're looking at is how does it play in that space, and also how does it work more autonomously as well as with existing systems that are in place.
Cool. Other opportunities that other panelists see?
You know, I can jump in a little. I think it is a time when we should revisit our traditional way how we run network, because, you know, traditionally we throw all the hay and the needle to a centralized system, and then we try to find the needle from the haystack. Now we have a feed on the switch itself, which is generating both the needle as well as the hay itself. So the question is, how can we increase the signal to noise ratio when we have a seat in the table on the switch itself? Should we still go back to the SNMP GNMI way of collecting everything and sorting it out? Actually, there is room for both. Like, it's not that one or the other. And the question is, how can we make the boxes generate more signals as well as, or as opposed to really low level hay plus needle altogether? So there is some opportunity there. And the other one is, once you have a seat in that table, you can see all the flows. You can kind of pipe out some of the flows somewhere else. So all the security services can evolve. And then if you look at the machine learning part of it, there are a lot of very interesting options that show up. And the hardware itself might evolve. It need not be just sitting with a single x86. You can throw in some GPUs there, here and there, because the entire thing is evolving. So there's tons of scope there.
Hey, thanks, Parenthop. I'm going to actually let that extend into sort of the next conversation topic, which is what innovations and services are you planning to build on top of SONiC? So it sounds like you've got some things in mind.
Yeah, the first thing that we are shooting for is, how do you detect network defects quickly and not depend on the haystack part as much? Because some of the defects don't even show up in the management plane. Like, nobody is telling you. Like, some flows are silently suffering. So we are looking at ways to have agents and processes running on the box itself to help us identify some of those defects. And the interesting part is, okay, you find the defect, then what do you do with the defect? Now, a link is bad or optics is bad. So the automation has to be there so that we can cost out that link, take all the traffic out of the link, and basically save the day. But if you just have a way to take a particular link out of the forwarding path, then within a week, you'll have most of the links out of the forwarding path. So now, how do you get them back, right? Because it's about grooming the bandwidth. It's not about only attending to the defect. So the automation has to be there, how to bring that particular link, clean that up, and bring that back, and do auto validation on both sides, so that can be commissioned fast. So our first order bit is identifying the defect and then basically mitigate the defect with the right kind of restore activity. So that's basically the first one. And we are going to leverage the GNMI way of streaming out data and doing some configuration on the top of GNMI to make sure that all the changes that needs to happen to cost it out and cost it back in, those things can be automated.
Parenthop, troubleshooting tools is definitely a common thing, a common theme.
Yeah.
You referred to some. We have a question from the audience regarding, what kind of troubleshooting tools do customers expect in SONiC? Maybe any of you, Quaid, have some other insights in that? What innovation do you see yourselves building your own troubleshooting tools? Are there other ones that you expect to have out there provided by either the SONiC community or other providers?
Yeah, so
I'm happy to share. Today.
Let's go to Quaid.
I'm happy to share today.
Awesome. So this is Quaid. I think it's a combination. That's what I see about the beauty of this is the ability to build our own where that matters, as well as leverage some of the existing or what's been done in the past. And having this insight, having the capabilities is really what it's about for me at the moment.
Get it. You.
Yeah, sure. Definitely look at the way that SONiC today is still pretty early stage. So I think people have to bear in mind that from the tool perspective, there's a lot of opportunities that we can continue to develop. We definitely leveraging the traditional way, because this is the way that we to kickstart the project. So SNMP start looking at the streaming telemetry. So in the end, I think I have to echo what Pablo saying, that we have to move to the telemetry, the streaming way to the operation models. So that's something that we definitely really heavily looking at to adopt the open config models, so that then we will have the standard models to monitor and also troubleshoot the switches. But as I said, this is something that we committed to invest the time to do it, and then we also hope the community will come together to build the tools and make the product definitely easier to manage and have more visibility for the operation teams.
Okay, great. I'll take one more question from the audience, and then we'll wrap up with the final question. Question coming in from the audience is, how many engineers would a company need in order to start thinking about using open source? Do you feel that you need a 20-person team? Can one engineer go ahead and get going? What do you think sort of the right starting size is?
Pablo, why don't you go ahead?
Maybe I'll just take that one. I was trying to wrap my head around that question for a second. I mean, I'll say, I think for us, we started out with, and if my team is listening, I'll probably get this wrong, by the way. I think we started out with about 4 engineers that really were focused on, again, just a crawl phase, right? I mean, scoping, defining kind of the objectives and so forth. Obviously, as some of the momentum started to kind of get built out from that, is where we started to leverage other skills, specifically around the software development side. But I think again, it comes back down to, for this question, it really comes back down to the specific use case, and staying really focused on, what do you want to solve, or what do you want to validate specifically, and keep it very, I would just say, because I think in general, just from an engineering perspective, you also want to make sure the engineers have very explicit roles in sort of how they approach the use case and the typical profile for this. So.
Thanks, Pablo. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Anyone like to add on
that? What I would say is there are some vendors out there who are trying to make this ecosystem work. So if the motivations are there and you see that there is a good fit for this technology in your infrastructure, I think even start with one guy and take the help from the vendor to set things up, and then slowly form a team around it. So that shouldn't be an entrance barrier that first I have to form the team and then I jump into the technology. Like, figure out some motivated individual who wants to play with it and build around them.
Great. Thanks, Parenthop. Take us on to the final question. What are your thoughts as the vision for this infrastructure as you go into the future? What do you think you're going to be able to build on? Go ahead, you.
Yep. I think we believe that the infrastructure will, in the future, will definitely integrate more tightly with the applications, because in the end, when you look at we're building a data center, we are just the service to the application. So given SONiC now have the open API, and we will be able to let the application to have more insights to the network, is definitely the right way to go. So we will see the management infrastructure. We would definitely look at the infrastructure more like just another resource to the network, another resource to the application, just like memory or CPU they manage today. We hope that we definitely try to build a network to enable the application. Just purely looking at the network is a resource to them. We also believe that the nodes will eventually evolve to be more programmatic, and then definitely more open for the developer to directly build an application running on the networks. So I think that is something that we are really seeing the evolution is happening. And we as a network engineer definitely wants to enable the application to use all the tools now we can provide to them to build better applications for our customer.
Excellent. Thanks, you. Other visions?
I'll pile on here a little bit as well. I mean, I would say from a pure infrastructure perspective, what I see is a world where services are consumed implicitly and transparently. I would say more from an invisible perspective, and this kind of goes back around how closely coupled, an open source model, if you will, how services are actually consumed and served as well. I do believe there's also another aspect of as the infrastructure's vision as more of a, I would say, more of a utility. There's also this aspect around how I envision operating it going forward, right? So I do think, we're heading towards a world where what we traditionally know as, managing networks with the conventional models of either CLI or scripts and things like that, to a world where, we've got a uniformly laid out CI/CD pipeline, writing code to the infrastructure. And, the traditional network engineer is evolving, with a lot of software development. So I think that to me is a really exciting world. At the same time, it's a little scary too, to be honest with you. I think for those of us that have been around for quite a while, that's an entirely new world that I could see us sort of heading towards as well. So.
Okay, great. Quaid, do you want to add your thoughts?
Yeah, so I agree. I think the insight is definitely there. The autonomy is
All right, I'm afraid we're losing Quaid's audio again. Maybe this is the right time to wrap up before anything else happens to network conditions out there on the internet. I want to say thank you to all the viewers and people who suggested questions on the panel. There's going to be a feedback forum so that if you didn't get your question answered, feel free to follow up through those, I guess ask again on that chat. I'll take those, present them to the panel, and we'll find a way to get answers out to you. Again, I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of different companies exploring what can be done with open source software to run on their network devices, the opportunities they see, the vision of what's possible, as well as how they've worked around and overcome some of the challenges that came up in the way. I'm also a big believer in open source for network operating systems. I think it's come really far and is going to go a lot further. And I'm really looking forward to see what happens in this ecosystem in the coming year. So my thanks again to the panelists and to you, the viewers, and to OCP and our technical support systems. Everybody, stay safe out there.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Friends. Bye.
Bye.